Hello everyone, welcome back. Today, we are going to discuss an extremely interesting and important topic: why smart people tend to stay quiet. Are you familiar with cases of highly intelligent persons who seem to have lesser voices or appear to be silent about their expertise? We will delve into the psychology and explain why they act this way in this episode. Without further ado, let us begin. Have you ever wondered why one person in a group of people tends to be louder than the rest? They laugh the loudest, interrupt the most, and somehow magically become the topic of conversation. Meanwhile, another person remains quiet in the corner, saying nothing and not interrupting anyone. They are quiet and reserved, and for the most part, people don't pay much attention to what they say. But then, one day, this quiet person suddenly speaks up and says something that causes everyone to stop and listen. Why? What makes some of the most intelligent people in the world remain quiet and unassuming, while others are constantly talking and making a scene about everything? Today, we will explore why smart people are quiet and how their silence makes them far more impressive than most. First off, I want to make something clear. Simply being silent does not mean someone is smart. Nor does being loud mean someone is not smart. What I'm about to discuss is not a character trait, but a pattern that can be seen among many highly intelligent people. If you were to look at the history of the world, you would see that many of the world's greatest scientists, inventors, philosophers, and thinkers tended to be far less talkative than average. They were quiet and unassuming, often choosing to observe rather than engage. They knew something most people didn't. They knew that words are cheap, but thoughts are valuable. Imagine two people walking along a beautiful lake. One person stands by the water's edge, throwing rocks into the water, watching the ripples form. The second person watches the first individual throw the rocks. Once the last rock has fallen into the water, the second person walks up to the first one and asks, "What are you really seeing?" The first person looks at the second one and says, "I see the calm surface of the lake. But what else?" The second one asks, "I see the beauty of the world." The first person replies, "The majesty of it. I see the stillness," says the second one. The first person nods. They both return to silence, and the lake reflects their faces back at them. This is what the mind is capable of. If one constantly shouts and bounces ideas off everybody they meet like a game of ping pong, eventually, their thoughts become jumbled up, like dirty water in a muddy puddle. However, if one chooses to stay quiet and reflect, then their thoughts can settle down, like muddy water in a jar, slowly but surely clarifying, until nothing is left but the stillness and majesty of a pure and clear lake. Psychologists have found that when we allow ourselves to be silent, our minds continue working in the background. It allows us to process information, solve puzzles, and even recall old memories. That's why some of the most important discoveries in human history were actually made in moments of stillness and solitude. Einstein spent hours upon hours just thinking about physics. Tesla would shut himself away in his room and meditate before coming up with an idea for an invention. Even Newton spent years in isolation during the quarantine period of the plague, and it was there that he came up with some of his most legendary ideas. Coincidentally or not, many of the world's most intelligent people chose to become silent and reclusive rather than obnoxious and boastful. Unfortunately, our culture does not reward introspection like it used to. Now more than ever, we are encouraged to post updates about our lives, reply to comments, and participate in heated arguments rather than reflecting in silence. Anything that requires even a fraction of self-examination is viewed as too deep or not worth it, and we move on to the next meaningless task at hand. Silence feels uncomfortable nowadays, and if it lasts a while, we assume something is wrong. Why hasn't my friend responded to my comment yet? Is my crush mad at me? If my followers aren't constantly talking about me, does that mean I've somehow failed in life? Intelligent people tend to ignore these questions, not because they aren't valid, but because they are distractions. Their focus is on something much bigger. A wise man once said, "Wise people speak because they have something to say. Fools speak because they have to say something." Think about the last conversation you had with somebody. Did they say a lot, or did they say very little? Did they talk for ages, or did they talk for only a moment? Which of these did you actually remember? Chances are the person who talked for ages didn't actually say much, if anything at all. Meanwhile, the person who spoke for only a short time said just enough to make an impression. This is actually quite common. Most conversations are long but ineffective, whereas a well-timed but short conversation can echo in one's mind for years. Intelligent people tend to fall into the latter category. They know that every word they say carries power and can impact the people around them. They also know that words can be used to share information about themselves, but silence can be used to gain information about others. Think about negotiations. What do successful negotiators do? They listen. They know that listening to their target allows one to learn about the other person's wants and desires, fears and hopes, likes and dislikes. Listening helps the negotiator figure out what the other one is thinking, which is far more useful than constantly talking and giving away information about oneself. Successful leaders do the same. They ask questions. They know that asking questions helps them gather information about the needs of their employees while also encouraging a healthy dialogue with them. That's why many intelligent people spend more time observing than explaining. Observation is an incredibly powerful skill, and most of the time, the most intelligent people are the ones doing it. They watch the world around them and see things that others are blind to. Most people look at the world, but only a minority observe the world. What's the difference? Looking is a passive act. Observing is an active one. When most people look at the world, they see the obvious stuff, like the sign at the front door or the music playing from the stereo. An observer, on the other hand, might see the nervous eyes of an anxious customer or the fake smile on the face of a dishonest employee. They notice certain patterns, namely in body language and tone of voice, that give away useful information about how the other person is feeling or what they might be thinking. They can see through people. But how does one do that when they're constantly talking? Because while you're talking, your attention is on yourself. However, if you're silent, your attention can shift to the other person, and all of a sudden, you can see the world through their eyes. Maybe that's why intelligent people often choose to be quiet. They don't do it to be arrogant or mysterious. They do it because they want to learn, both about others and the world around them. Because let's be real, every person you meet knows something you don't, and if you want to discover what it is, all you have to do is look closely enough. Have you ever talked to somebody who seemed to know everything? They always had an answer for everything, and if they didn't, they would quickly fabricate one. Their opinion on every situation was black and white, there was no gray. They were so confident about everything they said that at first, you thought they were intelligent beyond compare. But the longer you knew them, the more you realized that most of their facts and opinions were nothing but lies. And yet, they remained ignorant to this, their arrogance preventing them from seeing the truth. Now think about a truly smart person. You ask them a question, and instead of automatically giving you an answer, they stop and think about it for a moment. They consider the possibilities and carefully weigh each one out before settling on the one they think is most likely correct. They might even say something like, "Well, I'm not completely sure," or, "It's a bit complicated." But isn't that just as good? Isn't it just as good to speak confidently even when they're wrong? Psychologists have an interesting idea about this. They believe that as we learn about a particular subject, we become more aware of the fact that there's a lot we don't know about it. On the other hand, people who have very little knowledge on a topic tend to overestimate their own intelligence. It's called the Dunning-Kruger effect, and it basically means that the more ignorant we are, the more likely we are to be ignorant of our ignorance. It's very similar to climbing a mountain. When we stand at the foot of the mountain, it appears to be an impossibly tall and impossible peak. But as we start climbing it, we begin to realize that the summit is actually pretty far away, and we only climbed a minuscule amount. Suddenly, the mountain feels far bigger, and we feel as if we've only reached the ground floor. That's what the Dunning-Kruger effect is all about. There's a famous quote that goes something like, "Talk less, listen more," because people seldom notice what you tell them, but always what you make them think. Some intelligent people know this, and they use it to their advantage. They say less, but think more, allowing more of their ideas to seep into the minds of others, making them think about things they wouldn't have otherwise. Other intelligent people know that one single sentence can contain a staggering amount of information about a person. They also know that if they say it in the wrong way, it can reveal too much, thus giving away something they wish to keep hidden. This is why smart people are careful with their speech. They know that a careless word can ruin a friendship or a relationship. They know that words are powerful, so they choose them wisely. Another reason many intelligent people tend to stay quiet is because they're simply not interested in winning debates. Think about a typical online fight. One person keeps typing, trying to prove to the other one that they're correct, but the other suddenly stops mid-sentence and doesn't respond at all. Most people automatically think that the one who stopped was defeated and lost the debate. But what if I told you that it could be the opposite? What if I said that the silence of the winner in a debate is far more effective than the endless typing of the loser? The truth is, not every conversation is worth fighting over. One might be right, but if they were to spend too much time arguing over its validity, they would be wasting their time. Wise people realize this, and they avoid pointless debates by simply not participating in them at all. They may have a point, but they know that some points are better left unspoken. Ancient philosophers knew this long before modern philosophers did. They understood that a well-placed rhetorical question could help change one's mind far more effectively than a long-winded speech ever could. It's a timeless and universal truth that has stood the test of time. Think about this. Has anyone ever changed your opinion by loudly shouting at you? Chances are, the answer is no. On the other hand, has anyone ever changed your opinion by giving you a meaningful speech or a thought-provoking question? Of course they have. That's the difference between intelligence and obnoxiousness. Intelligence doesn't shout and scream as loud as it can in order to be heard. It subtly makes people think, causing them to reconsider everything they previously believed. As expected, another reason intelligent people stay quiet is that they are comfortable with being silent. Most people don't feel comfortable being silent, so they do everything they can to avoid it. They fill empty space with noise just so the meaningless noise doesn't become deafening. Some do this by talking, others do it by posting random crap online. But have you ever stopped and realized that it's not silence that's uncomfortable? It's the fact that we feel uncomfortable with silence. Intelligent people tend to be far less bothered by it. They know that silence isn't something to be ashamed of. In fact, they know that silence is something to be proud of. They know that the ability to carry a conversation is one thing, but the ability to hold someone's attention during it is quite another. Think about a musician. A good musician doesn't play music constantly. They understand that silence is just as important as music itself, and they use it to give depth to the melody. The same thing goes for conversations. If every second of it is filled with words, then it will feel meaningless and empty, like just another pointless conversation that offers no depth or meaning to life. Conversations gain value from silence. That's why smart people know when to say things and when to wait. One of the best ways to do this is to hold off on speaking while in a conversation. It doesn't mean you're arrogant, like some people think, but it does mean you care about being thoughtful. Think about it. If you're constantly talking, you're always thinking about yourself, what you're saying, and whether or not people are listening to you. However, if you're silent, you stop doing all of these things and instead think about someone else and whether or not they're paying attention to you. It's a clever trick. In many ways, holding back in a conversation is a form of emotional self-preservation. It's something most intelligent people understand instinctively, but many other people are so ignorant that they fail to see it. To them, the silence of an intelligent person is just arrogance. It's all ego. They don't understand that it's simply a defense mechanism, one that keeps people at a distance just so they don't reveal too much about themselves. Intelligent people often know too much, and the more they speak, the more information leaves their mouth. In many cases, they'd rather preserve their valuable knowledge by keeping their opinions to themselves. But it's not always about them. Some smart people are incredibly aware of how their thoughts affect other people, and they know that words can carry far more weight than actions ever could. They choose their words carefully so that they can help others rather than hurt them. They speak only when their voice matters, which is why many say they are far more impressive and impactful than most. Let's talk about something else. Many intelligent people like to spend their time alone, not because they're antisocial, but because they understand a simple psychological fact. Solitude and loneliness are not the same thing. Most people are familiar with the concept of loneliness, though few truly understand it. It's a feeling, a painful and depressing emotion that occurs when you feel as if you don't have anyone to talk to. It's different from solitude, however. Solitude is like water. It can be dirty or clear, murky and unpleasant, or pure and refreshing. It all depends on what you put in it. The same concept applies to loneliness. It's a feeling, one that can be triggered when you feel you have nobody to talk to or when you feel you're not connecting with those around you. In many ways, it's the opposite of solitude. While solitude is a state, loneliness is the emotion that results from feeling disconnected or dissatisfied with one's current level of social interaction. The two concepts are quite similar, but they're both very important, primarily because they both influence the way we live. Intelligent people recognize this and often seek out solitude for long periods of time to clear their head. They understand that their minds need time to recharge, and they take long walks, read books, and write down their thoughts so that their minds can remain strong and healthy. Some people look down on these behaviors, thinking that they're wasting their time, but the truth is, they're doing the opposite. They're engaging in the most important activity one can do, reflecting. Reflection is extremely important, especially for highly intelligent people. Many of history's most famous ideas, facts, and opinions were actually conceived during long periods of reflection. A writer sits alone in silence, staring at a blank page and slowly conjuring up the next great novel in human history. An inventor gazes at the horizon, imagining new gadgets and machines that will change the way people live. A musician listens to the sounds around them before putting together a melody that will move thousands of people across the world for generations to come. All of these activities are done in a quiet and solitary setting, and this is no coincidence. It's because most intelligent people understand the importance of being still and silent for long stretches of time so that their minds may grow and develop. That's also the reason they're often seen avoiding other human interactions, despite being completely capable of joining them. They protect their minds from overuse, and in today's fast-paced world, that's extremely necessary. It's illegal to stop and think anymore. If you're sitting in a restaurant by yourself, everybody assumes you're waiting for your friend to arrive. If you're walking on the street, people will ask what's wrong if they see you by yourself. If you're alone somewhere and not on your phone every 5 seconds, people get suspicious. We've become so used to being constantly engaged that silence and stillness now feel weird to us. But they shouldn't. They should feel normal and comforting because deep down, we all crave them even if we don't admit it. In fact, if you think about it, you'll realize that very few of us actually enjoy being engaged all the time. We want to be alone and by ourselves. We want to sit in the silence of our rooms, without music, without phones, without computers. We want to reflect on the things that happened during the day, the things we said, the people we talked to, the mistakes we made. We want to understand who we are and where we're going. These are all things that few of us do, simply because we don't realize how important they are. That's the difference between most people and intelligent people, because the smart ones know that these things are important, and they set aside time for them every day. This is also what makes many intelligent people so impressive. They spend hours upon hours reflecting on deep questions like, what do I believe? Or, who am I as a person? Did I do the right thing? Or, what can I do better tomorrow? These are the types of questions that no one else asks. They are the types of questions that can only come from someone who takes the time to be alone with themselves. That's also why many successful people schedule reflection time into their daily routine. They understand that it's a necessity, which is why they prioritize it over other, less important activities. Another reason intelligent people tend to be quiet is that they do not want to share too much too soon. Most people are very quick to share almost everything about themselves at the first opportunity. They tell strangers where they're from, give coworkers their cell phone numbers, randomly message old friends from high school. They share freely, and they believe that sharing is the most important thing they can do with their lives. But intelligent people often realize that the most important thing they can do with their lives is actually not to share. They know that certain things should be said at certain times, and they're usually very good at judging the right times to say them. They also know that a loud and boisterous person reveals far too much about themselves, which is why they're often so reclusive and unapproachable. Intelligent people understand the importance of keeping things private when necessary. Think about a soldier, for instance. They often have crucial secrets that must not be revealed under any circumstances, and to do that, they're forced to always be on their guard. It's grueling work, and most people aren't willing to do it because they don't realize the danger it comes with. But intelligent people understand that keeping secrets can be dangerous, and they're willing to keep their guard up so that they don't reveal too much too soon. Intelligent people rarely reveal too much too soon because they understand that their opinions are valuable, and they should only be used when and where they're needed. They know that the best time to give your opinion is when the other person has asked for it. This is why smart people listen so assiduously, so that they learn what the other person is thinking about before sharing their own ideas. It allows them to speak with more purpose, which makes them far more impressive than most. That's also the main reason they tend to be quiet and unassuming. They don't want to share their thoughts unless they're certain that their audience needs to hear them. They're often seen as reclusive and mysterious, which is an added bonus, because mystery is something most people find attractive in others. But the real reason they're interesting is because of what they say when they speak. They know what they're doing, and they know when to do it, which is a rare quality indeed. One of the reasons intelligent people are so good at controlling their speech is that they rarely react to stuff. Instead, they pause. They analyze the situation deeply, and they respond. It's a clever tactic, and it's one that's very common among intelligent people. But what few realize is that this trait serves an incredibly important purpose. It gives them room to breathe and reconsider everything before reacting. It allows them to think before they speak, which is one of the most important things one can learn in life. When we think before we speak, we can say things that strengthen friendships rather than destroy them. We can make decisions that make our careers flourish instead of waste away. We can choose actions that don't lead us into pointless arguments and fights. Perhaps most importantly, we can give ourselves peace of mind. Here's something you probably don't realize. Not everyone's opinion is worth listening to. Think about it. Imagine you're walking down the street, and suddenly you spot hundreds of people in the distance. Some wave at you, some ignore you, some curse you out, and a couple of them yell loudly enough for you to hear what they said. Now tell me, would you stop and argue with every single one of them? Of course not. You know that your time is valuable, which is why you only talk to the people you care about. The same principle applies to opinions. Intelligent people know that their time is limited, so they dedicate it to only the things that matter. They don't waste it on useless debates or pointless arguments because they realize that they can get far more out of life if they focus their attention on the things that truly matter. They know when to give their opinion and when to withhold it, and this lets them conserve their precious mental energy for when it's needed the most. Intelligent people also know when to avoid opinions, primarily because they understand the dangers of agreeing with the wrong ones. They know that certain opinions can lead to disastrous results if they're supported by too many people, which is why they're exceptionally critical of them. They know that some opinions are dangerous, delusional, or even outright evil. They analyze them carefully, weighing the positive aspects against the negative ones, and then carefully choosing what to do based on those factors. But most importantly, they know that they should only support opinions that are beneficial to themselves and the world around them. After all, an opinion without a positive impact is just an opinion. It's wasted potential. It's a wasted opportunity to improve the human experience and bring more joy and happiness into the world. Think about the following saying. The lion doesn't turn around every time a dog barks. It means that you shouldn't waste your time responding to everybody's criticism. It says that strength is not defined by the ability to prove oneself to others, but rather by the ability to know when no proof is necessary at all. And maybe, just maybe, this is why some of the most intelligent people in our world are so successful with their words. They know when to speak and when to stay quiet. when to turn around, and when to ignore the dog barking at them. They understand the concept of self-preservation, and they use it as a tool to protect themselves from people who seek to hurt them. They're wise with their words, knowing that they have the power to destroy people with careless opinions. They're cautious with their opinions, knowing that they must support only those with positive outcomes. They're smart with their opinions, knowing that the world is far too big for them to share them all with everybody they encounter. Above all, they know that words are powerful, and they choose them wisely. This is probably why many intelligent people tend to be so successful. Their words carry tremendous power and weight, which is why what they say often has a far greater impact on our lives and society than most. But silence is powerful too, and in fact, it is often the sound of powerful words being formed. Because as we have seen time and time again, the most powerful ideas, facts, opinions, and discoveries are often conceived in quiet moments of stillness and solitude. The strongest fighters are silent before they strike, and the most impressive minds are still when they speak. They know that words carry power, which is why they're careful with them and say them only when they have something important to say. Some argue that the world rewards loud talkers far more than silent ones, but this is a gross exaggeration. Let me ask you something. How many friends do you think an average person has? Hundreds? Dozens? A few? In today's world, it's easy to mistake followers for friends. You can have 10,000 followers on social media and hundreds of contacts on your contact list. Dozens of people can like your every photo. But when life deals you a blow, who do you have to turn to? Interestingly enough, many intelligent people tend to have a surprisingly small social circle. Sometimes it's only 2 or 3 people, and they're very often satisfied with that. What gives? Well, it turns out that many intelligent people are well aware of one simple truth: quality over quantity. Think about it. A tree doesn't need thousands of shallow roots in the ground. It needs a handful of deep roots that will allow it to withstand harsh weather. The same principle applies to people. One honest friend is worth 100 sycophants who'll vanish the minute you fall. That's the first reason why many intelligent people have smaller social circles. They know that popularity is a hollow pursuit. They prefer substance to surface-level interactions. Intelligent people have found that one honest conversation with a real person can be infinitely more rewarding than 100 empty chatty talks with people who are only good at listening to themselves. You see, pretending to be somebody you are not is incredibly energy draining. Acting like you like people you don't actually like. Acting like you agree with people you fundamentally disagree with. Acting like you find something funny when you find it the most boring thing in the world. It all takes a toll on your psyche. Smart people understand that. That's why they're much more likely to be authentic and upfront. Not mean, not cruel, but simply honest. If they don't like somebody, they'll tell them. They know that toxic and insincere relationships are ultimately unsustainable. Now, let's talk about other reasons why smart people have fewer friends and followers. Another reason why intelligent people tend to have comparatively smaller social circles is that they value substance and depth. Think about it. At a dinner party, you can either have shallow small talk conversations or deep meaningful ones. Let's imagine that at one dinner, the group of people you're with decide to have a gossip chat. They'll talk about who is dating who bought a new car, who made a mistake, who humiliated themselves, etc., for hours. Meanwhile, at another dinner, people discuss ideas, concepts, theories, books, dreams, and ambitions. Which conversation would you rather be at? It doesn't have to be either or, obviously, but most intelligent people prefer the latter. They value ideas and substance. They find shallow conversations pointless and emotionally draining. In fact, many psychologists agree that gossip is ultimately a form of entertainment, whereas meaningful conversations are what ultimately make us human. That's why many people feel refreshed after a deep conversation with somebody and emotionally drained after a gossip session. In other words, it's not the quantity that matters, it's the quality. The next reason why many smart people have fewer social connections is that they don't crave unconditional approval. They're not puppets who bend at the slightest criticism from others. They do care about what other people think about them, but they don't let other people's opinions dictate their behavior. You see, if other people told you what to do, where to go, when to come, how to walk, etc., you would never arrive at your destination. Life is similar. There will always be people who tell you what to do, how to act, what to say, and so on. If you try to obey all of them, you'll ultimately obey nobody. That's the simple truth intelligent people understand. That's why smart people are much more concerned with doing what is right rather than seeking universal approval. Another reason why intelligent people have fewer social connections is that energy is contagious. Spending too much time with unhappy people will make you unhappy. Spending too much time with people who constantly complain will teach you to complain. Spending too much time with people who procrastinate will make you a proponent of procrastination. On the other hand, spending time with positive, sincere, creative, and wise people will make you a better person too. Intelligent people understand that. That's why they're very careful about who they spend their time with. They're not arrogant, they're simply realistic. They know that the people around them have a powerful influence on them. There's a famous saying that states that you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. I don't know if that's entirely true, but it's undeniably hard to disagree that it's at least somewhat true. After all, our actions are contagious. Our attitudes are contagious. Even emotions are contagious. Have you ever been around someone who was exceptionally happy? You might have felt happy yourself soon enough. Have you ever been in a room with sad people? You may have felt sad, anxious, or even depressed. That's the power of emotions. Intelligent people understand that. That's why they're mindful of who they spend their time with. They know that they need to invest more time in people who contribute positively to their lives. Instead of trying to impress everybody, they try to impress more important people. Now, let's move on to another topic. Many unintelligent people mistake quantity for quality. They do everything they can to be popular and well-liked. They attend parties and events because it makes them feel good to be surrounded by people. However, they often forget that popularity without substance is ultimately empty. It may feel nice while it lasts, but eventually, such people realize that most of the people around them were only puppets. In other words, all these people were only there because they wanted to be there. They weren't truly interested in you, but rather in your money, power, status, and so on. Intelligent people rarely make that mistake. They understand that genuine interest is much more rewarding than empty flattery. They may only have a small group of people they're truly interested in, but who also genuinely like them. That's why many intelligent people value quality over quantity. They don't need everybody's love and approval. They're much more likely to seek the understanding of a few important people. And maybe that's the ultimate mark of an intelligent person. They realize that their true worth is not defined by how many people like them. It's defined by how many people understand them. Once that realization occurs, it becomes much easier to stop chasing superficial approval and start seeking meaningful understanding. Because, in the end, a calm mind, a few trusted allies, and an exciting, purposeful life are much more valuable than empty praise from people who barely know you. Have you ever noticed that the most powerful person in the room isn't always the one who speaks the most? Sometimes, the most influential people are those who manage to say the least. They sit quietly, observe, and listen. They may not speak much, but when they do, everybody seems to be listening. They know the power of silence and influence. You see, the value of words is dictated by their scarcity. Gold, for instance, is valuable mainly because it's scarce. If gold were as abundant as dirt, it would scarcely have any value at all. The same principle applies to words. The problem with constant talking is that it diminishes the value of everything you say. It creates noise. Meanwhile, strategic silence can generate meaning and substance. Smart people understand that, which is why they're often most influential when they speak the least. Let's imagine 2 teachers. The first one talks incessantly throughout the class, trying to fill the air with as many words as possible. They speak about various topics, some of which matter, others don't. However, by the end of the lesson, most students have forgotten almost everything. Now, imagine another teacher who spoke much less, but strategically. They told their students something important and allowed them to reflect on it. The lesson wasn't overloaded with unimportant information. That's probably why it resonated so much better with the students. Most influential speeches and messages are built around meaningful words. Meaningful words are important, but they're often best delivered in combination with meaningful silence. The most influential people understand that. They know that silence plays a critical role in communication. Interestingly enough, people often say much more with their actions and reactions than with their words. You see, it's relatively easy to say something, however, it's much harder to do something. That's why many great leaders, interviewers, negotiators, and therapists have understood the importance of strategic silence. By creating pauses in their speech, they allow their interlocutors to process the information. They give them an opportunity to think. This way, the message gets across much better. The next time you have an important conversation with somebody, try allowing them to do most of the speaking. See how much information you can gather by giving them enough space to do so. After they finish speaking, you can tell them what you think. They'll be much more receptive to your words after you've just listened to them. That's the power of attention. Unfortunately, attention has become one of the most endangered species in the modern world. People are too busy to pay attention to others. They constantly receive notifications and other interruptions. As a result, they're always preoccupied. They don't really listen to what other people say. They only half hear them, mainly because their mind wanders. Intelligent people realize that attention is a vital resource, which is why they're much better at using it. They pay more attention to people, which allows them to build stronger relationships. They also pay more attention to what they say, which prevents them from saying stupid things. Most people have heard the difference between listening to reply and listening to understand. Listening to reply means that you pay partial attention to what somebody says so that you can reply later. Listening to understand means that you pay full attention to the person so that you can truly understand them. Can you imagine how different our conversations and relationships would be if more people were able to listen to understand? Arguments would become fewer, relationships would be much deeper, and everyone would be much happier. That's the power of attention. Now, let's talk about another advantage that intelligent people have. They know that silence can often be more powerful than words. It conveys meaning and showcases emotional maturity. For instance, when you're insulted publicly, you have two basic options: insult back or stay silent. It should be obvious which one is a better option, but most people fail to realize it. Emotionally immature people will always resort to verbal sparring. Mature people, however, know that their best option is to withhold judgment. They know that staying calm is much more powerful than insults. That's why they respond to drama with emotional stability. That's what most influential people have in common. They understand that emotions are natural, but that being overly emotional is a surefire way to look childish. They know that anyone can scream and shout at somebody in anger. However, it takes emotional maturity to stay calm and collected. That's why smart people are much better at managing their emotions. They know their value is dictated not by their feelings, but by their actions. In other words, their actions speak louder than their emotions. They realize that their actions generate consequences, whereas their emotions are only fleeting sensations. That's another reason why intelligent people are so impactful. They've managed to become masters of emotional regulation. They know that words and emotions are much more important than the actions and thoughts they engage in. There's an interesting saying that states that before speaking, ask yourself 3 basic questions. Is it true? Is it necessary? Is it kind? If the answer to any of these questions is no, it might be a good idea to stay silent. Think about that. How many people would change their lives if they stopped saying things that are untrue, unnecessary, or cruel? How many conflicts could be avoided if people applied this simple rule? Words can build people up or break them down. That's why intelligent people are much more likely to think before they speak. They know that words carry power and meaning, which is why they're much more careful about what they say. Another interesting characteristic that intelligent people tend to exhibit is that they understand the importance of avoiding the trap of attention. They see through the illusion that says that the more you talk, the more people will listen to you. They realize that most people seek superficial approval. They understand that attention is usually the easiest way to achieve it. However, intelligent people also realize that you need much more than superficial approval to build meaningful relationships. They know that respect is much more important. That's why they spend time being worthy of respect instead of chasing cheap approval. In other words, they understand that a powerful message often contains many fewer words. Now, let's wrap things up by talking about one of the most influential truths that smart people know and that many unintelligent people fail to grasp. It's the truth that being silent makes you influential. It's a simple yet powerful idea. Smart people understand that influence is ultimately a function of scarcity. They know that words are much more powerful when they're not overused. That's why they speak less and listen more. And when they do speak, they're more likely to say meaningful things using meaningful pauses. That's why they're often much more influential than everybody else. Now, let's end this episode with a question. Who was the smartest person you've ever met? Think about your answer. Was it somebody who constantly talked? Was it somebody who sought approval? Was it somebody who tried to prove that they were always right? Or was it somebody who simply gave meaning to your life by speaking rarely but saying the most important things? For many people, the answer will be the latter. That's because many smart people realize that their intelligence is a function of how carefully they select their words. So, what separates intelligent people from everyone else? It's their ability to think before they speak. After all, many of the most influential messages in human history were delivered via silence. Words are often unimportant, but the pauses that allow us to reflect on them can be critically important. That's the reason why many influential speeches and conversations are built around carefully selected pauses. It's also the reason why many intelligent people value silence. It allows them to become more observant. It enables them to become better listeners. And it ultimately allows them to say much more impactful things. Now, let's take a look at the rest of the reasons why smart people speak less. One of the main reasons is that they seek to be thoughtful rather than entertaining. It's much easier to entertain people. All you have to do is be funny, engaging, and entertaining. However, it's much harder to be thoughtful. You have to understand people and be intellectually stimulating. That's what many of the world's most influential people have realized. They've prioritized substance over spectacle. They understand that most people are only looking for a distraction. However, thoughtful people offer a permanent benefit. Asking deeper questions allows us to become much more thoughtful. That's why many wise people say that the best way to develop your mind is to always ask yourself and others 3 simple questions: why, how, and what if. All great ideas and innovations have been thought through these types of questions. Many of the most important inventions and scientific breakthroughs in human history began with one simple question. That's how humanity discovered fire, the atom, quantum physics, and so on. That's also how we developed medicine and technology and brought ourselves to where we are today. All of it began with asking questions and pursuing answers. That's how curious minds work. They seek new information. They have no fear of the unknown. And most importantly, they're willing to admit that they don't know something. That's what many intelligent people have in common. They're perfectly willing to say 3 simple words: I don't know. To some people, this mindset may seem like a weakness. It may seem as if saying I don't know is a sign of stupidity or lack of confidence. However, it's actually quite the opposite. It's an intelligent recognition of one's limitations. If you think you know everything, you're much less likely to gain new knowledge. On the other hand, if you realize that you don't know much, you become much more receptive to learning. That's why the most intelligent people in history are those who constantly ask questions. Every interaction transforms into a learning opportunity. Failures become valuable lessons. Successes become opportunities to do even greater things. That's the type of mindset that helps you succeed. That's the type of attitude that prevents you from being stagnant. That's the attitude intelligent people have, and that's the attitude that many unintelligent people are missing. Intelligent people are also much more likely to be humble. They know that humility is what allows them to keep learning. They understand that if they want to grow, they need to remain open-minded. Unintelligent people, on the other hand, are much less likely to admit that they don't know something. In fact, arrogance often serves as a convenient excuse that allows unintelligent people to avoid learning. That's also why arrogant people are much more likely to believe in conspiracy theories or crackpot ideas. They think they're smarter than everybody else, so they're much more likely to pursue ideas that may seem ridiculous to most people. Now, let's take a look at another advantage that intelligent minds possess. They're much more likely to learn from mistakes rather than try to avoid them. That's another reason why they're often so successful. Many unsuccessful people fail simply because they're incapable of learning from their mistakes. They think that failure is something that should be avoided at all costs. As a result, they're much less likely to take risks, explore, learn, and grow. Smart people, however, have a fundamentally different relationship with failure. They understand that it's often a natural part of life. They know that their mistakes are opportunities to improve. So, instead of worrying about being perfect, they focus on becoming better. That's why smart people are often much more confident than everybody else. Confidence is not the result of being right more often. It comes from being much more aware of their own mistakes. It's easy to become arrogant if you achieve something big in life. However, intelligent people realize that arrogance is a much more dangerous emotion. It blinds you, makes you unteachable, and causes you to make irrational decisions. That's why smart people are much more balanced. They know that failure is not the opposite of success, it's a part of it. That's why smart people often choose silence over self-promotion. They're much more likely to listen than to talk. That's how they became smart in the first place. Once you realize that wisdom often derives from silence, you'll also understand why the smartest minds are those that speak rarely. Sometimes, patience speaks louder than impatience. Sometimes, questions speak louder than answers. Sometimes, listening speaks louder than talking. The world will always have its loud people. They'll always seek to entertain and impress others by being boisterous and boastful. However, the wise will understand that true influence often comes from being thoughtful and meaningful. That's why intelligent people value their silence. They know it makes them influential. They understand that words are only valuable when they're strategically placed. Sometimes, those are the most important things to be said. Now, before we conclude this episode of our podcast, let's talk about something important. I hope you found the lessons in this episode useful. If you've listened to this episode and realized that silence truly does speak louder than words, maybe the next time you're in a social setting, you'll be better at choosing when to speak and when to be silent. That way, you'll be able to make a bigger impact with your meaningful words. Before we say goodbye for now, I want to ask you one simple question. Do you think the smartest people tend to be more silent? Do you agree or disagree with that idea? I'm eager to hear your thoughts, so make sure you share them in the comments below. Who knows? Maybe your opinion will inspire some people to change the way they view and practice silence. If you like this episode and you think that our podcast can help you become smarter, make sure you hit that like button down below and subscribe to our